had killed the market for, of course. So now this had killed the market for, of course.
I'm ready.
Wachirikawo.
Ati kisitikawo nabadde manyi wazzeeyo eri. Manyi wazzeeyo.
Nkyali ku ddagala. Gwe gundi togiraba?
Giraba. Kale. Gamba muti eyo.
Tuli mwana gwe. Enjala ekutta. Mbadde nkunyumiza. Nyumiza eddako naye baaba. Yogera. Introducing a topic tuve wano. Ndeka ntudde nnyo mu kitangaala.
Olabika tugenda kwogera ku Sudan Crisis eri Sudan.
Waliyo ki?
Waliyo olutalo. Kugolingako.
Nze binnyumizeeko just nze mpa hint just ebemmere.
Waliyo olutalo.
Sudan eri waggulu mu mambuka. Eri mu beeru. Okira otuintroducingako tulabe.
Watudde ku kiyumba kya nkoko. Watudde ku kiyumba kya nkoko.
Nkoko wano nnyingi. Oba storage.
Nakugamba aeroplane towulira.
Kunta.
Eh?
Kunta.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone that is watching us here on Black Hot Fire Network. My name is INNOSSETU with my colleague Africa Maria. Today is Friday, and it is 2nd of August. Yeah, the 8th month of the year, I guess. Yeah. If you're watching me on Facebook, actually, our Facebook is down. Sorry, our Facebook is down. Our Facebook is down. If you're watching me on Twitter or YouTube, hi to you. Let me hope you're doing good and subscribe if at all you're watching me for the first time. Just subscribe to our YouTube channels, different Black Hot Fire YouTube channels, and for Twitter, it is just a follow. Actually, you follow the page and like. Yeah, today's topic is actually before I go to today's topic, ekiri in Nigeria bali mu kutta abantu. So far 19 people have been reported dead in the strike, the protests. 19 people.
Emaze place.
Yeah?
Emaze taking a place.
Eki.
The situation in Nigeria. Bagitandise yesterday.
Bali balangirira that they're going to start on August, 1st August. So they had to start. But so far 19 people, 19 people have been recorded dead. They have been shot by the police and the army. So it is a serious issue. Waliwo mukwano gw'omwe yagambye mbu protests in Nigeria ziri led by Kenyans. Nagambye Kenya nga nnene. Munnowo yeshe gyava okukola emabega. Munnowo shewe gyava okukola emabega mbuno ziri led by Kenyans. I don't know, maybe.
Ani yagambye?
Bunnyo, ndabye isho ya Bunnyo.
Daira, oyo ali mento naawe.
Mukyayaka abadde alina abadde ategeeza bintu byala, not that.
Alimba musiro oyo naawe. Nze musana gukuba nnyo sikulaba. Sikulaba nakulaba.
Nze teweetaaga kundaba. Weetaaga kukola. Nze kasita nkulaba. Kasita nkulaba. Obadde akyusa ki?
Okay.
Naye kati awo amasannyalaze ogajjawo awo.
If I told I'm clear kambeerewo. Sina we ngajja kiva tulina okwanguwa. I just charged the laptop.
Ate biriko okwanguwa bino bya ssaawa tebiriiko okwanguwa. Bya ssaawa tebiri situation. Wetukoma biriko kwanguwa. But today's topic is about, of course, the situation that is in Sudan. Actually, this situation started actually as a joking issue after the downfall or the overthrow of Bashir. Now, now the army divided into two parts. So this civil war between the two rival factions of the military government of Sudan, and that is the Sudanese armed forces, which are called SAF, that are under Abdul Fattah, General Fattah Abdul, and the paramilitary support forces under the Janjaweed leader, of course, Hamidit which began during the Ramadan of 2023. Fighting has, of course, concentrated around the capital city of Khartoum and the Darfur region. So, as of 21st January 2021, at least 13,000 people have been killed in Sudan. That is a big number.
Mm.
And we see over 7.7 million people were internally displaced, and more 2.1 million others have fled to the country as refugees, as many civilians in the Darfur have been reported dead as part of the, of course, the massacre that has been done. So the war began with,
Mm.
of course, attacks of the RCF and
Mm.
on the government sides as strikes. Artillery and gunfire were, of course, reported across Sudan. So the sites of Khartoum and, of course,
Mm.
Amdama were divided between the two warring factions of Fatal relocating his government to Port Sudan as the RCF forces captured most of the Khartoum government buildings, attempting by the international powers to negotiate and seize the culminated in the Treaty of Jeddah in 2023. However, it did not go through. So we see that kati luno olutalo lw'e Sudan lulinganga eh?
Mm.
Olutalo lwa Sudan lulinganga Museveni w'anaavaako. Military
Mm.
police, the person that leads military police, n'akola eggye erirye,
Mm.
n'akulira SAF naye n'akola eggye erirye. That is
Mm.
what is happening in Sudan. So these people actually, actually Sudan is of course divided into two parts. There is a government that is in of course in Khartoum in the city, and there is also another government. So we see that uh, the stale, of course, the stalemate, of course, occurred during, of course, which the two sides were then joined by the rebel group who had previously fought Sudanese government by mid-November. That is Miniwari and Mustafa Tomba factions of the Sudan Liberation Movement, who officially joined the war in support of this of the support of the SAF. Okitegeera nti even there is a certain rebel group that joined one of these government, one of these of course these generals who are within Bashir's government. Waliwo abarebel abajoininga side emu. Kitegeera. But we see that starting with October 2023, momentum began to swing towards the RCF as the paramilitary defeated any forces in Darfur and made gains in Khartoum state. Um, so, uh, as the South has made, of course, gains in the region of which are based, but we see that Sudan has been, of course, inhibited since the prehistory and seen with many conflicts, with the foreign invasions and resistance. So anything, any, of course, ethnic tensions, religious disputes, and of course, disputes over resources throughout the antiquity
Mm.
of the Middle. So Sudan was, of course, conquered by Egypt in 1821, and of course, in 1881, the religious leader Muhammad, of course, Ahmed, led the nationalistic revolt and established an Islamic and national Mahdist state in much of the territory of the modern Sudan. So after Ahmed's death, a
Mm.
British Egyptian force command by Lord Kitchener retook Sudan, and by 1899, the country became a condominium of Egypt and the United Kingdom, but was de facto ruled by UK alone and would remain a British control until 1956. So when it gained independence and inherited the pre-19, of course, 11 borders, Sudan has experienced more than 15 military coups and usually been ruled by military interspersed with the short periods of democratic parliamentary rule. So two civil wars, the first beginning with the 1955 to 72, and the second with 83 to 2005 between the central government and the southern regions. So which led to the independence of southern Sudan in 2011, which almost ended up killing 1.5 million people. And the conflict in the western region of Darfur displaced 2 million people and killed more than 200,000 people. So the war in Darfur and of course, and the formation of the RCF. By the turn of the 21st century, Sudan's Western Darfur region had endured prolonged instability and social strife due to combination of the racial and ethnic tensions and disputes over the land and water. And in 2003, the situation erupted into a full-scale rebellion against the government rule, against which President and military strongman Omar al-Bashir vowed to use forceful, of course, action. So the resulting war in Darfur was marked by the widespread state-sponsored acts of violence, leading charges of war crimes and genocide against al-Bashir. So the initial phase of the conflict led to approximately 300 people dead. So people are dying in these wars, and 2.7 million people were forcibly displaced. Even though the intensity of the violence later declined, of course, the situation in the region remained far from peace. So, two crash uprising by the non-Arab tribes in the Nuba Mountains. Al-Bashir relied, of course, Omar al-Bashir, sorry, relied upon the Janjaweed, a collection of Arab militaries or military, which was drawn from the camel trading tribes, which were active in Darfur and, of course, portions of Chad. So in 2003 and 13, sorry, Omar Bashir announced that the Janjaweed would be recognized as rapid support forces. Okitegeera? Rapid support forces, and he also announced, uh, of course, that the rapid support forces would be placed under the command of the Janjaweed commander Mohammed, of course, Dangalo, more commonly known as Hamidit. So, the rapid support forces, of course, perpetrated mass killings, mass rapes, torture, and destruction of villages, and were accused of committing ethnic cleansing against the Far and Masalt, and of course the Zagwa peoples in, of course, in Sudan. So leaders of the rapid support forces have been, of course, indicted for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court. But Dangalo was not personally implicated in 2003 and 2004 atrocities. By 2017, a new law gave the Rapid Support Forces the status of the Independent Security Force. So Dangalo received several gold mines in Darfur as, of course, patronage from our force from Amal Bashir. We see that and his passage and his personal wealth grew, of course, substantially. That is Dangaro. So Bashir, during this time, the Rapid Support Forces developed a working relationship with the Russian private military outfit, the Wagner Group. These developments ensured the Rapid Support Forces grew into tens of thousands and came to possess of thousands of armed pickups trucks, which regularly, of course, patrolled the streets of Khartoum. So Bashir's regime allowed the Rapid Support Force and, of course, other armed groups to proliferate to prevent threats to security from within the armed forces, of course, a practice known as coup-proofing in the army. So, the two leaders that we are having in Sudan that are fighting for power, this is, of course, the chairman of the Transitional Sovereignty Council, that is Abdul Fattah, and of course, the commander of the Rapid Support Forces, Muhammad Dangalo, or the leader of the Janjaweed. So in 2018, protests against Bashir's regime began, starting the first phase of the Sudanese revolution. So 8 months of sustained civil disobedience were met with violent repression. And in 2019, the military, including the Rapid Support Forces, ousted, of course, Omar Bashir in a coup d'etat, ending his 3 decades of rule. So the army established a transitional military council or a junta, of course, government. So Bashir was imprisoned in Khartoum and was not was not turned over to the ISIS, which of course had issued warrant for his arrest on charges of war crimes. So protests calling for civilian rule continued, and in June 2019, the transitional of course, the TMC's security forces, which included both the Rapid Support Forces and the SAF, perpetuated the Khartoum massacre, in which more than 100 demonstrators were killed and dozens were raped. So Dangalo denied, of course, this attack, and we see that in response to international pressure, uh, the mediation by the African Union and Ethiopia, the military agreed to share power in the interim joint civilian military unity government, where the Transitional Society, of course, council, headed by the civilian Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, which elections to be held in 2023. In like not forgetting, actually, in October 2021, the military seized the power in the coup led by the Sudanese armed forces, which are called the SAF, of course, which the leader is Fatal, and of course Dangalo. So the Transitional Sovereignty Council was, of course, reconstituted as the new military junta led by Al-Ban, monopolizing power and halting Sudanese transition to democracy. So apparently, that is what is happening in Sudan. Those are the two of course, army leaders, of course, officers that are fighting for power and territory within Sudan. Of course, Dangalo and of course Fatal. Like I said, Fatal was leading the Sudanese armed forces, and of course, Dangalo was leading the Rapid Support Forces. The Rapid Support Forces yalinganga special force nga olabanga SFC yebeera ku president kitegeera kyokka ate oli yali alidinga bajjako Bashir. Now they also want power within themselves. Yogera nga sinayongera. Nga weemyutinze.
Nga neemyutinze. Sudan as a country, by the way, before I continue the particular discussion, I want to let the audience know that we no longer combine the Southern Sudan, to the part of what we call right now Sudan. Of course, we have been having conflicts for a very long time. If we are to drive back to the conflicts of 1890 stuff and all that, we shall realize that this is uniting the southern part and the entire Sudan. We know that, of course, we have seen a lot of conflicts between the Sudan of Africa and the Arab Sudans. We know that in Sudan, the Arabic is, of course, widely spoken language. Over 97% of the population are Sunni Muslims, with a small Christian minority. That was so. This was basically one of the major reasons why we had Sudanese having a civil war between the black ones, the ones I call the African Sudanese, and the Arab Sudanese. Now we know that before this particular country, of course, broke away, but from the 19th century, the entirety of Sudan was conquered by Egyptians, under the Muhammad Ali dynasty. And this caused a lot, actually, of whites or the Arabs to invade this particular part. We say that the separation of Africa's largest country, which was Sudan, which of course happened July 9th after decades of civil war and the loss of more than 2 million lives. South Sudan descended from Sudan and became the world's newest nation, and a peaceful and democratic breaking into two of what was Africa's largest country. Apparently, I've been watching a lot of basketball tournaments, and we have seen the southern part of Sudan actually representing Africa to the heights. And from the social media, I see like a lot of people asking, where are these tall, dark skinned guys from? I mean, where are these people from? We've not seen such kind of people and all that. And people like these are people from the southern part of Sudan. And this is the youngest or the newest country in Africa. So you can add from the total number of the countries we had now, Sudan, southern part of Sudan, of course, was added. And a lot of people were like, wow, because of what, of course, South Sudan was. People didn't know a lot. Most people outside Africa, the moment we speak about Sudan, there is a picture they picture like people in Sudan are white, like Arabs with that kind of stuff. Until that's why we have a lot of people confused about this. Now, if you are discussing about this particular situation, I think we are not going to include the southern part for now, and we're still going to look at the other part that southern part of Sudan, of course, broke away from. Um, we have been having this conflict for a very long time, and at times we had conflicts divided in two uh, different rebellions, different purposes of attack and wars. First, regional disputes. So kolindeko katu iwe mwana yo okora obainokora kinyuma. Hmm?
So, so Sudan, when actually when we talk about the origins of the arrows, the arrow P arrow, the arrow P arrow M, N, and the arrow CN, we see that the Sudanese Liberation Movement, or the S arrow M, of course, is a rebel group active in Darfur, primarily composed of members of the non-Arab ethnic group and established in response to their marginalization by the, of course, by Bashir's regime. So since 2006, the movement has split into several factions due to disagreements over the Darfur peace agreement, with some factions joining the government in, of course, in Khartoum. And by 2023, the three most, of course, prominent factions were of course, the SLM Minawi under the Mini Minawi, the SLM, and of course, which was under, of course, Abdul Al-Na, and of course, there, of course, and of course, the other group that was led by Mustafa. So, uh, all these groups, of course, signed the 2020, of course, Juba Peace Agreement, ceasing hostilities and receiving political appointments. But the SLM, of course, had refused to sign and keep fighting. So, due to the fact that the SPLM was founded by units of the predominantly South Sudanese or Sudanese People's Liberation Movement stroke army stationed in the areas of the remaining of the remained in Sudan following the South Sudanese vote for independence in 2011. These forces then led a rebellion in the southern states of southern, of course, Kordofan and the Blue Nile a few months later. In 2017, the so-called SPLMN split between the factions led by Abdulaziz and the one led by the Marek, with of course Aliol demanding of course secularism as a condition for peace, while Aga did not agree with this. So during the Sudanese revolution, we see that factions, Alioli's factions declared an indefinite out, of course, unilateral ceasefire, and by 2020, a peace agreement was signed between the Sudanese government and Aga's faction, with Aga later joining the Transition Sovereignty Council in Khartoum. He held out until he agreed to sign a separate peace agreement with the Sudanese government a few months later. Further steps to consolidate the agreement stalled following the 2021 coup, and of course, his faction, of course, instead signed an agreement with the SLM, where, and of course, and the Sudanese, of course, Communist Party, agreeing to cooperate in order to draft the revolutionary charter and remove the military from power. Because the military has been in power in Sudan ever since Omar al-Bashir's regime ended. Until Omar al-Bashir's rule ended. So we see that tensions between when we see when we generally look at, of course, the Sudanese war or the Sudanese crisis in months after the 2021 coup, the already weak Sudanese economy steeply declined, fueling wide protests demanding that the junta return power to the civilian authorities. So tensions arose between the Alban, of course, and the Dangaro government over over the of course the Albanese restoration to office to the old guard Islamist officials who had dominated Omar al-Bashir's government. Dangalo saw the appointment of the officials as a signal that Albany was attempting to maintain the dominance of Khartoum's traditional elite over the Sudanese politics. So this was a danger to the, of course, the Rapid Support Forces, its political position, as said elites were hostile to Dangalo due to his ethnic background as a Darfuri Arab. Dangalo's expression to regret over the October 21 coup signaled a widening divide between him and the Al-Baran. So tensions between the Rapid Support Forces and the, of course, the Sudanese Armed Forces began to escalate by February 2023 as the Rapid Support Forces began to recruit members across Sudan. Throughout the February and early March, the Rapid Support Forces built up the Sudanese capital of Khartoum until the deal was, of course, brokered by 11th March 2023, and the Rapid Support Forces withdrew. So, as part of these deal, negotiations were conducted between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces and civilian leaders, but these negotiations were delayed and halted by political agreements. So, chief among the disputes was, of course, integration of the Rapid Support Forces into the military. Like I said, the Rapid Support Forces, this was a special armed group or army that was, of course, protecting Omar al-Bashir. So the Rapid Support Forces insisted on the 10-year timetable for its integration into the regular army, while the army demanded integration within 2 years. So others contested issues included the status given by rapid support force officers in future hierarchy, and whether rapid support forces should be under the command of the army chief rather than the Sudanese commander-in-chief al-Burhan. So by, of course, 11th April 2023, rapid support forces deployed near the city, of course, of Merawe, as well as in Khartoum. So government forces ordered them to leave, and of course, and refused. So this led to clashes between the rapid support forces, which took control of the Soba military base, southern Khartoum, and rapid support forces began their mobilization, raising fears of potential rebellion against the junta. So the Sudanese armed forces declared the mobilization illegal of this group. Yogerako.
Part of the Sudan. By the way, we should all remember, as we continue to discuss about this particular conflict that is going on in Sudan, we should remember that we have two opponents supporting the situation in Sudan. We have the Russians, we have the Ukrainians, and they are both supporting opposite groups. And for sure, Sudan has for a very long time been in a good relationship with Russia. Like last time I told you that we have seen for centuries of course wars and conflicts in Sudan, Russia being among the supporters of this, giving cheap ammunitions and weaponry to different rebel groups, to the point that anyone who can afford a gun in Sudan would have access to guns. But in turn, we saw that Ukraine has militarily assisted Abdul Fattah or al-Burhan's government directly during Sudan's civil war that began in the 2023 due to shared interest in combating Russia, of course, which backs the rapid support forces in Sudan. So Russia was backing the rapid support forces, and of course, Ukraine came in and said, all right, that was around 2003, is when actually Ukraine decided to join this conflict in Russia. But sorry, in Sudan. But Russia has been in Sudan for a very, very long time. So the existence of Russia, of course, has not just begun just like Ukraine. After, of course, they had this dispute, Russia and Ukraine having issues, and Sudan has been one of Russia's important allies. So it was very important for Ukraine to also involve itself in the matters of Sudan and support what Russia doesn't support, really, which actually created that huge conflict right now. Until now, we are seeing conflicts breaking each time and again in Russia. Now, the major purpose why we saw like the southern part of Sudan, of course, breaking away really was because most of these people never involved themselves in these agreements, but they were the ones suffering the major consequences because they were not having their resources equally distributed to them. The Russians were apparently targeting this particular region because of the oil wells and all that. And yes, they broke away, and now we are seeing still we are seeing wars and conflicts still taking place in the major Sudan. Let me call it that. It is important for these wars, like I always say, because, like I said, Sudan has been a very important ally with Russia. We have always seen conflicts all over Africa. And like I say, at times you question yourself, like, why don't we have people sit on a dialogue and come to an agreement over a particular thing? This happens because we always have people involved in the conflicts of Africa, and it is very important for the Africans to remain disputed. It is very important to remain with these disputes. It's very important for them to remain in disagreement. It is so important for them to remain in conflict, because as we fight, both parties are gaining. Now, now Ukraine is joining the other part, and Russia is still taking. It's of course still holding to what it was supporting for a very long time. The issue in Sudan right now wouldn't be about who is taking power, because no matter who has, first of all, we first had issues about the Sharia laws, where people were about the Sharia laws were so stiff. Remember, the Muslim fraternity was, of course, taking control, and apparently people were forced to follow the Sharia laws, no matter the language you speak, no matter your religion, no matter where you come from. The entire southern Sudan had that, of course, Sharia law enforced on the people. But this ended that around September 2020. This is when we had, of course, Sudan officially becoming a secular state after Sudanese transitional government agreed to separate religion from the state, ending 30 years of Islamic rule and Islam as the official state religion in the northern African nation. Now, this Islamic religion taking over the southern part, sorry, the entire Sudan before, of course, the southern part broke away. Everyone was forced to speak Arabic, no matter your language. Now, I want you guys to know that we have got some other people who are more, especially in the northern part, who belong to a particular, for them, all they know, them, the language they can speak is Arabic. And then we got people who are Dinkas, we got a lot of other different African Sudanese, the ones who are Africans, because we have got the Arab Sudanese and the African Sudanese. The African Sudanese were also forced to speak this Arabic language. And whether you like it or not, it was the major language that was spoken in the entire or the whole of Sudan. And a lot of people were like, we cannot be speaking this language as ours, because we, as the the African Sudanese, we have our own language. We have a right to speak our languages. We do not need to speak this, and particularly, we don't even practice Islam. So that war happened, and then we saw a little bit of dialogue, and of course, the breaking away, and that. But remember, there are some other people in the other part of Sudan actually who are not Muslims. So they were all advantaged at a certain particular time. Now, when we saw the issues of Ukraine and Sudan, it is more of people trying to convince the Africans that, since it has got a lot to do with beliefs, it has got a lot to do with who is going to benefit from what, because for centuries now it is a threatening terrain, by the way. For centuries now, Sudan as a country, it has experienced conflicts that are so useless. Because if you are fighting your brother for something that you can both share, I call it useless. We are seeing military officials. We cannot have a civilian leader. We are military officials and all that. It's threatening to rain by the way. Kuba yinza okugayiwa eno essaawa. So we know that if you try to look, Sudan is not only experiencing the war crisis, because if war in Sudan is no longer news. People no longer even talk about the war in Sudan because apparently Sudan is experiencing wars every now and again. We have not seen it putting the guns down and having a bit of peace, no. But when we look at the crises and a lot of issues that, of course, are in Sudan, and Sudan being an agriculture and oil, its economy being largely based on agriculture and oil exports with additional revenue coming from mining and manufacturing, I don't really understand why Sudan is still experiencing famine. If you look at most of the pages and the websites and everywhere, something there you're gonna find is that people in Sudan are dying of hunger. They are going without food. This is a country that has been, of course, involving itself in agriculture, and its biggest export is, of course, agricultural product. Sudan has is having this export, its biggest export being whew, sorry, its biggest export being on agriculture. Why would people be going hungry or starving in Sudan? Yes, we see, of course, a lot of people coming in the US, United Nations, US Aid, and all those, of course, UNICEF and all the different organizations coming in and they want to aid Sudan, giving them food and all that. And we have seen, of course, majorly, most of these things we usually see eh, um never mind. Mukoro okutuma tugambye leero kyendiva kifaya kusajja kutambuza IC paka enzalo tekuvaawo.
Ovaawo embizzi katugenda tutandika kuwulira embizzi nga zeetala.
Sigenda kusooka mutingeko ngende mu nju enkuba egenda kunsanga wali ngendeko munda.
Naye nze ndaba we wali layiti. Ogenda mu nzikiza.
Kale so era nno mutabanyi so we have had conflicts in Sudan are no longer news because each time you follow Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC, in the subway, of course, you're going to realize there is news about Sudan conflicts. Bannange empisa eno ennuma nnyo lindako.
causing citizens to fear worsening conditions as buses arrive to pick up individuals fleeing for safety.
Sudanese people are afraid that there might be unethical practices in the war against civilians and using civilians as human shields. These are our fears after the evacuation of expats.
Standing with their luggage, Sudanese citizens were taking any available ride out of Khartoum, even after a spike in the bus fees.
There's a big increase in the price of gas, which reflected on the price of the bus ticket. The bus to Egypt was for 30,000 or 35,000 Sudanese pounds, with an extra cost of the taxi on the border crossing. Now it's more than 200,000 Sudanese pounds. And every day there's a change, an increase. If you calculate the increase, it's around 700% increase.
Tens of thousands of Sudanese have fled Sudan to neighboring countries since fighting between the military and the well-armed Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group started on April 15th. At least 420 people have been killed. The conflict has also triggered a humanitarian crisis in the impoverished country, where millions of people have been left without access to basic services. On Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the United States was pressing Sudanese military leaders to extend and expand a ceasefire.
The Sudanese people are not giving up on their aspirations for a secure, free, and democratic future. Neither will we.
This all comes 4 years after long-running autocrat Omar al-Bashir was toppled. Expats from around the world have been evacuated from the country in the past few days.
All the evacuees are students from the International University of Africa, based in Khartoum, the Sudan. 39 in total, as I said earlier, 19 Kenyans, and 20 from our allied states and friends.
Most of the time we were sleeping, as in lying down on the floor, just praying and keeping positive. Yeah, and I strongly had the feeling that I had to keep positive, very focused, and above all, to take any risk to get me out of that country.
Right now it's still dangerous. We are hearing from colleagues it's less intense, but for the past 8 days it was continuous.
A lot of people, of course, are ignoring this war, but the war is, of course, the war is serious, of course, and people are being killed. However, these international players, or actually, they are actually we have not seen, of course, international, of course, players like they call them influencers, star players. We have not seen actually being put down, but like I was saying, like we have not seen people, of course, coming out to talk about Russia, because these people, their deals are still going on in, of course, in Sudan. They are still getting gold out of Sudan. They are still doing their businesses like they used to do them, of course, in Sudan. But no one, of course, has come out, of course, to talk about these international players. But they actually, when we look at, of course, the countries, of course, So apparently, the situation in Sudan is a stressing one, and there are a lot of factors that can be attributed to this. But we see, of course, in 2023, like I've been talking about the RCF since the beginning of this show, the RCF, the SAF, the Rapid Support Forces. This is, of course, this is actually this is of course the lead of the rapid support forces, and that is Dangalo, General Dangalo, and of course the leader of the Sudanese armed forces, the rapid support forces. This is of course a special group that was protecting, of course, Omar Bashir, that was led by the Janjaweed and the Sudanese armed forces. These are the government forces. So the Sudanese armed forces, actually they had agreements. They had sat down, of course, and talked about, of course, merging this army into, or making of this army to come into the government army, and of course this army, and they wanted this in 2 years. So the army said, actually, for us, if we are to plan that, that is to happen within 10 years or a 10-year time. So fighting broke out, and we see that the rapid support forces attacked south, of course, the Sudanese armed force bases across Sudan, include Khartoum, and of course its airport, and that was in 2023 when this, of course, crisis broke out. There were crashes at the headquarters of the state, of course, broadcaster, that is Sudanese TV, Sudan TV, which was, of course, later, of course, captured by the rapid support forces. Uh, Bridges and, of course, roads in Khartoum and its hinterland were crossed by Rapid Support Command. So the next day saw the Sudanese armed forces counter-offense with the armed retaking, of course, Merau Airport alongside the headquarters of Sudanese TV, or Sudan TV, and the state radio. So the Sudanese Civil Aviation Authority closed the country's airspace as fighting began. So telecommunications provider, and that is MTN, shut down internet services. And by 23rd of April 2023, there was a near total internet outrage attributed to attacks on the electricity grid. Sudanese international trade began to break down, with, of course, the Maersk, and of course one of the largest shipping companies in the world, announcing a pause on new shipments to Sudan. So when we look at the economy of Sudan, of course, has been stricken so much by this war, by the so-called Sudanese war, that is, of course, between these two uh, army officers. But we see that Dangalo directed his forces to capture and kill Alban, and the rapid support force units engaged in pitched and, of course, blood combat with the Republican Guard. Ultimately, Alban managed to evade, of course, to evade capture or assassination. But his base at the Sudanese Armed Forces headquarters was placed under the rapid support force surge, rendering him, of course, unable to leave Khartoum. So in an interview with Al Jazeera, Dangalo accused Alban and his commanders of forcing the rapid, of course, support forces to start the war by, of course, scheming to bring, of course, deposed leader Omar Bashir back to power. He called for international community to intervene against Alban, claiming that the rapid support forces was fighting against the radical Islamic militants. Following the first few days of the war, of course, the Sudanese armed forces brought the reinforcement from the Ethiopian border. Although the ceasefire was announced for Eid al-Fitr 2023, fighting continued across the country. So combat was, of course, described as particularly intense along the highway from Khartoum to Port Sudan and in the industrial zone of al-Baghia. So intercommunal clashes were reported in Blue Nile State, and by the beginning of May, the Sudanese armed forces claimed to have weakened the rapid support forces combat capabilities and repelled their advances in, of course, multiple regions. So the Sudanese police deployed its Central Reverse Forces in the streets of Khartoum in support of the Sudanese, of course, armed forces, claiming to have arrested several hundreds of the rapid support force fighters. So the Sudanese armed force announced it was launching an all-out attack on rapid support forces in Khartoum using airstrikes and artillery. So airstrikes and ground offensive against the rapid, of course, support forces over the next few days, of course, caused significant damage to infrastructure, but failed to dislodge, of course, rapid support forces from their positions. So we saw that mm, from further threats to his life, from of course Dangalo and of course Alban, of course gave a public video address from his, of course, besides the base at the army headquarters vowing to continue fighting. And by 19th May, Alban officially removed Dangalo as his deputy in Transitional Sovereignty Council and replaced him with the rebel leader and of the council member of Marik Aga, with, of course, Alban trapped in, of course, Khartoum. Aga became the de facto leader of the Sudanese government, assuming responsibility for peace negotiations, international visits, and day-to-day running of the country. So, there is a treaty that was signed in Jeddah, of which international attention to the conflict resulted into United Nations Rights Council, of course, calling a special, of course, session to address the violence in Sudan. So, voting to increase monitoring of human rights abuses, and of course, delegates from the South Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Force met directly for the first time in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, for what was described by Saudi Arabia and of course the United Nations as the pre-negotiation talks. So after diplomatic lobbying from Saudis and Americas, the warring sides signed the Treaty of Jeddah, of course, in May, vowing to ensure the safe passage of civilians, protect relief workers, and prohibit the use of civilians as human shields. So the agreements did not include a ceasefire, and clashes resumed in Geneva, causing more casualties. So the United Nations, under the Secretary General of Humanitarian Affairs, Martin, expressed frustration at lack of commitment for both sides to the end of fighting. So the situation, of course, remained volatile, with both sides trading blame for attacks on churches, hospitals, and embassies. So casualties mounted, particularly in Jenin, where Arab military loyal to the Rapid Support Forces were accused of atrocities against non-Arab residents. A temporary ceasefire was signed and faced challenges as fighting president in Khartoum. And of course, the agreed upon ceasefire, of course, times saw further violence between the 28th and, of course, and 97 people were reportedly killed by the Rapid Support Forces and Arab military when they attacked the predominantly Masoret town in the western Darfur on May 2008. We see that fighting, of course, continued in Khartoum. As of June, we see that Khartoum witnessed tank battles resulting in casualties, in of course, in northern Sudan. So we see that the Rapid Support Force took control of several important cultural and government buildings, including the National Museum of Sudan and, of course, the Yomak Military Industrial Complex. So acute food insecurity affected a significant portion of Sudanese population. We see that Alban was still trapped at the army headquarters and unable to leave, and in order to break him out of the Sudanese armed forces elected to send a column of troops to lift the siege of the base. So the force was ambushed by the Rapid Support Forces and defeated, with, of course, the paramilitary claiming it had killed hundreds of soldiers and captured 90 vehicles along the column, of course, commander. In response to the escalating violence in Khartoum, the Sudanese armed forces increased the intensity of their airstrikes and artillery, of course, bombardment, leading to heightened civilian casualties, often numbering in dozens per strike. So, shelling by the Rapid Support Force also increased in intensity, of course, leading to many civilian casualties in turn. So, heavy fighting continued in Khartoum throughout August 2023 with crashes breaking out across the city. So the Rapid Support Forces laid a siege to the Sudanese armed forces, armed groups base, breaching its defenses and taking control of the surrounding neighbors. So the Sudanese armed force also made offensive with the Support Forces controlled by the Republican Paras of the Yoma complex, of course, coming under the Sudanese Armed Force air bombardment. An offensive was, of course, launched against the Yamak, but this was beaten back after the Rapid Support Force sniper, of course, in the reinforcements. One of the few remaining, of course, bridges between Khartoum and Khartoum North was also destroyed by the Sudanese armed force in an attempt to deny the Rapid Support freedom of movement. So, the Sudanese armed force operation successfully secured the Alban from his besieged base at the army headquarters, allowing him to head to Port Sudan and hold a cabinet meeting there. So, there have been a lot of diplomatic, of course, ceasefire in Sudan. However, we still see mm, Sudan. We still see sorry, fighting in Sudan, um, even up to now. A lot of people have been killed. Russia, it is still doing its gold business in Sudan. Its business had never ended. So someone may be asking, why is this war not ending? Yeah, this war is based on, of course, on a lot of factors that range from tribalism or ethnicity to religion. Because when you look at actually the first places that were attacked when the war had just started, these were, of course, these were churches and mosques. Yogerako nange nkoye. These were churches and mosques. Appointing of Dangalo into the transitional council, he was rejected because of ethnicity, because he's a Janjaweed staff. So this war has a lot to do with religion and, of course, tribalism. Let me say that. So when we talk about Sudan, a lot of people think that Sudan doesn't have Sudan doesn't have a lot of people think that Sudan doesn't have Catholics. They think it is a Muslim community. This is wrong.